Hello everybody, I'm here to tell you of my study of opportunities and obstacles to change KwaZulu-Natal's lethal shark nets and drumlines. It's a qualitative study of stakeholders' perceptions, and I hope that it will inform a conservation strategy that prevents the deaths of sharks and other marine megafauna. So shark nets and drumlines are set to catch and kill sharks in the vicinity of a bathing area. They aim to reduce the number of sharks and therefore the risk of shark bites. Because of this and other threats, shark populations have been drastically reduced. For example, in Durban in 1952 there was just 1 kilometre of nets, and in that year 552 sharks were caught. By the 2000s there were 37 beaches in KZN with 23 kilometres of nets, and they were catching 567 sharks per year, which is just 25 sharks per kilometre of net. It's a 95% reduction, and it's the same the whole way around the world. Sharks are in serious danger, and we cannot continue to kill them to keep bathers safe. We have to find another way to do it, but it's difficult. We aimed to investigate the knowledge and perspectives of stakeholders whose work intersects with the shark nets or the drivers and consequences of their use. We wanted to identify what inhibits changing methods and what might enable such change. We conducted semi-structured interviews with 29 stakeholders from various organisations like the Sharks Board, all 3 levels of government, national, provincial and local, as well as staff from Ezimvelo and various NGOs. We used thematic analysis to identify, analyse and report patterns within the qualitative data. 2 of us were responsible for coding and extraction of themes, and we took a realist approach, working to reflect what was said as opposed to trying to interpret underlying meaning. First, we asked each interviewee to describe how shark nets work. All the Sharks Board interviewees and quite a few of the others described the nets as fishing devices, in other words, to catch and kill sharks. Some stakeholders from the other organisations described them as physical barriers, and others weren't exactly sure how they work. There were 4 dominant themes in discussions about obstacles to change. The most frequently mentioned was a sense of liability. For example, one interviewee said, "What the general public and activists don't get is that if you're in a position of making decisions, and you make a decision that even indirectly results in a young kid being killed, that's a difficult thing to internalise." Slightly different, someone else said, "Victims will sue the department or the country." Much was also said about the political nature of the system. For example, we could do whatever we do as scientists to illustrate that the shark is not as it is made out to be, but if there isn't a full appreciation from decision makers at a political level, I don't think our efforts will gain any traction. Interviewees talked about mindsets pertaining to sharks, shark bites and bather protection in KZN compared to other provinces. It's a much more healthy conversation in the Western Cape, whereas in KZN it feels like it's been brushed under the carpet. We have shark nets, we will always have shark nets, and we don't talk about it anymore. And then there's the matter of status quo. There's no way of changing the system now. It's too entrenched. It's written on paper. We noticed that many of these issues are of governance, though mindset is a more social issue. There was also a major theme around alternative methods of protecting bathers, and within this theme there were important obstacles. The lack of proven alternatives, the high cost of potential alternatives, difficult surf conditions. This was mentioned by quite a few interviewees, but I would say that this fact is underappreciated. It's very difficult to deploy equipment off of KZN's exposed beaches because of high energy surf, steep drop-offs, movement of sand. We also often heard about the frustratingly slow progress of innovation. There were fewer opportunities than there were obstacles. National government, especially though, was positive about promising alternatives. You can see one here. This is the shark-safe barrier. Also, interviewees referred to the fact that you can change people's perspectives about sharks. The suggestions were that people should be educated about sharks, the real risk of shark bites, and about reducing that risk. So opportunities were technological and social issues. In sum, many people who make decisions about the nets are unaware that they are set to kill sharks. The main obstacles to change seem to be governance issues, the sense of liability, political nature of the system, and the status quo. There was also social obstacle, which are the mindsets in KZN, and then there were methodological obstacles, which were technological, economic, physical, which suggest that there are no feasible alternatives in terms of efficacy, cost, and environmental conditions. The opportunities were technological, promising alternative methods, and social. Education can change minds. I'm sure you noticed there's some links. The link between the social obstacle and social opportunity is obvious, and so is the recommendation for an innovative campaign that clarifies the facts, so I'm not going to discuss this. There's also a link between the alternatives obstacles and the technological opportunity, but it's just a partial solution to the multiple obstacles. One of the most promising technologies is the Sharks Board's electrical shark repellent cable that you see here. It's now in an advanced stage of development. It was tested in the field in the Western Cape where the experimental conditions are better. It has been slow progress, and I understand that this is mostly because Sharks Board is constrained by funding issues. Their income's predominantly from province, and funding for this specific project was erratic. I'll come back to this when we talk about governance. But the good news is that it's an effective shark repellent that is not harmful to sharks or bathers. But the Sharks Board is unlikely to deploy the cable in KZN. It's too expensive and the surf is just too big. Their strategic planning document suggests that they have no intention of testing the cable in KZN over the next 5 years, but they do intend to sell a unit. So it sounds like the most promising technology is not going to be used in KZN. Over the past few years, shark control programs in Australia and Reunion have developed programs of innovation that systematically test a variety of benign alternatives. We know from their experience that there are no straightforward answers. There's no obvious, easy, cheap alternatives to protect entire beaches. Still, I think that we need a program of innovation in KZN. We have found funders that are interested in helping to solve this problem. We received funding to conduct the stakeholder interviews that I'm reporting on here and to host a meeting of our stakeholders to begin the process of assessing the imperfect alternatives that exist that could be tested in KZN. We're at the stage where we're trying to find a date that would suit our major stakeholders. We envisage collaborating with them to prioritize alternatives and put those that are worth trying into the water to test them at Richards Bay against the surf conditions. We know that we're likely to fail at first, but there's value in trying and failing. There were multiple obstacles that were governance issues and no obvious governance opportunities, so we'll have to look elsewhere for opportunities. We've been giving it a lot of thought. Sharks Board is constrained by their funding model. They're a Category 3C public entity, and they want to change to a Category 3D, but what if a more radical change was better? Also, there are currently plans to absorb the Sharks Board into Esimvelo, so change is afoot. Now may be the perfect time to assess governance structures and at least investigate other institutional types. We recently came across a framework for conservation change that integrates a focus of individuals with a focus on systems. You take the status quo and change agents begin by assessing what exists. They look at individuals and their behavior and diffuse actions that would lead to new norms. The focus on individuals fits with our communication campaign that we mentioned earlier. The focus on systems has much to do with governance. What we call governance, they call social structures, the institutions, policies, economic systems. They recommend an assessment of the social structures to identify obstacles and opportunities to transform the system. It makes sense to look at how other bather protection programs are governed. A very quick look suggests that most of the shark fishing programs are political. In Australia, their programs are situated within the provincial type governance structures, and Reunion is a little different. They use a cooperative governance system made up of representatives from the state, local government, and user groups. We wouldn't recommend that for KZN at the moment, given the low level of awareness of how the nets work among our local government, as you can see from this study, and other recent studies indicate that very few ocean users in KZN know how the nets work. But not all bather protection organisations are as political. The ones that don't set out to kill sharks seem to be governed differently. Shark Spotters is a non-profit and public benefit organisation, though much of their funding comes from local government, and the emerging Shark Safe Barrier is a private company. The Bather Protection Program in Cape Recife in Brazil is governed by a committee made up of provincial equivalent of emergency services and medical services with numerous environmental bodies, and it is researchers from the university that catch sharks to tag and relocate them. In seeking solutions, there's probably a host of models that is worth considering. So this framework could be a good one to move forward with. The communication campaign would ultimately be designed to diffuse actions which would contribute to a new set of norms, while a social structure analysis could look to transform elements of the institutions, the networks, vision, knowledge, and funding allocation that would also change norms. Theoretically, they would reinforce each other and result in social change. So in conclusion, the obstacles and opportunities identified by our stakeholders lead us to believe that change is difficult but possible. Concurrent programs that focus on changing the perceptions of individuals in KZN and assessing governance structures of the Bather protection system have the potential to create new norms and thus transformative social change. It's difficult to get around the environmental constraints of our big surf, and economics may always be a problem. But we hope that the beginning of a program of innovation where we systematically assess benign alternatives in KZN could yield useful, tailor-made solutions to keep both sharks and bathers safe here. Thank you to all the stakeholders for giving their time and sharing their knowledge. Thank you to our funding partners for making the work possible. Thank you for your interest. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.